Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. My name's Bill Alvstad. Welcome into the show, Keith. It's our first in a series of looks at the 2023 NFL Draft prospect looks and players as we look at the quarterback position. Will be our first position group up for discussion. Welcome in.
Yeah, and so the quarterback's something we've already kind of looked at a little bit because we talked about what Geno Smith's contract might look like, what we hope it will look like, and a little bit about, well, okay, if not Geno, who? But this is more of a draft look. I mean, we'll mention some other players, but we really want to get into what the draft looks like as far as quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that so far, at least in my research, there's a consensus like top 4 quarterbacks in the draft, but some of those quarterbacks are top of one person's list. On another person's list, that quarterback that was at the top is quarterback number 3 or 4. And so I'm not exactly sure that every big board out there has reached a consensus on the true number 1, except for maybe Bryce Young in most boards. Now, if you go look at NFL Mock Draft Database, their big board has CJ Stroud at the top.
Which is new. It was not that long as Bryce Young at the top. So
exactly.
Just goes to show you where people move around.
Right. So I thought, you know, since this part of it is going to go out of the way fairly quickly. Now, this is a Seahawks show, obviously, but we're going to talk about NFL quarterbacks in general, and options available for the Seahawks include free agents. I'll just throw this out there right now. It's not a great list. Geno's close to the top of that list, combined with Baker Mayfield, Jimmy Garoppolo, Daniel Jones. After that, it's just a hodgepodge of journemon quarterbacks.
Which is all it ever is.
Around.
Yeah,
exactly.
Unless you know, and then you've got guys that might be moved like Carr in Vegas, who's likely actually to be moved because they benched him and said they were done with him. So there might be some other movement, but that's usually going to require some draft capital. You're going to have to trade for him, that kind of thing.
Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, et cetera. They're going to franchise Lamar Jackson. Now they may end up trading him out of that franchise tag, but they're going to franchise him. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers, but that doesn't seem to fit Seattle's timeline and budget to go with a guy like that that's established, that's ready to win. Right now, I just see a diminishing quarterback there, and the value doesn't line up for me, and the timeline with Pete Carroll and stuff, it just doesn't seem like a great fit. None of these quarterbacks really in the free agent market end up being a great fit, except for Geno Smith, really. Geno fits the Seahawks fit Geno. It seems like a logical marriage, but we just don't know what the contract's going to be. If it's reasonable, I'm going to say under 25, and they can make it fit in the first year with the salary cap. I see the Seahawks signing Geno Smith.
Absolutely,
that seems
I do too.
To me to be the way to go, but that does not prevent them from drafting a quarterback. I see a lot of chatter out there, especially on Twitter, with Seahawk fans saying, "Let's just sign Geno. We don't have to worry about the quarterback in the draft." That's not necessarily true.
I don't believe that to be true either, because what you have with Geno is a guy who we have one half of a year where he was phenomenal. Then the second half of this last year where he came back down to earth. And previously in his career, he was not a starting caliber player. And so we get a chance now. I mean, we need at least another year to kind of evaluate that. But what does that end up doing, right? If you are going to go all in on Geno Smith and give him a 4-year, $160 million deal, the way SpotRack says that a team should, then you're basically hamstringing the franchise financially for a guy that honestly he's old enough and the track record's not there. Like that's not a good pick. That's not a good way to run a franchise. So, but you know what? You keep the number down, make it 25 million a year, make the first year 15. As far and stretch the cap stuff out a little bit, and he's a really enticing option for Seattle, who has a lot of other needs and doesn't really, they're not like one player away.
Yeah. And there's only 2 or 3 quarterbacks in this draft that are ready to go right out of the gate. And depending on which team they land with, some of the teams at the top that are quarterback needy, especially ones that are going to be up there or trying to trade up into the first 2 or 3 spots, are teams that are going to struggle out of the gate with those first-year quarterbacks. Seattle's kind of in a unique situation, especially if it can sign Geno Smith, one of the viable free agent quarterbacks out there that can lead a team. We've seen him lead a team into the playoffs with not a complete roster around him. If you add to that roster and make it a little bit more of a complete team, Geno may be able to lead them, as far as maybe the NFC Championship game. I don't know. But it's possible, I think, with Geno.
I think if they improve the defense to a point where it takes a bunch of pressure off Geno, then because when he started to struggle down the stretch, and I was thinking about this since our last show, and I'm like, when he started to struggle, it was when the pressure was on, because now everyone that considered the Seahawks a playoff team, but the defense was still not playoff caliber, and so he was pressing, and it can be argued away that he was taking on all the pressure himself. Whereas if you improve the defense to a point where you don't have to put up 30 to win, maybe he goes back to being the Geno in the first half of the season when there were no expectations.
Yeah, if you align Geno with several other quarterbacks, playoff worthy quarterbacks that made the playoffs this year, and you take a look at the defensive rankings for most of those teams had better defenses. And I think that you're onto something there with regards to it being a complete team roster game. And if we had a better defense, especially, with turnovers and stopping teams and generating more opportunities for the offense, I think that Geno looks even a little bit better. So let's kind of go through this. Let's set the free agency stuff aside. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that in future episodes, and we definitely will. Let's move on to the NFL draft. Everybody wants to talk about it. Nobody really knows what to do. We know if Seattle doesn't sign Geno and they go down the road of signing a Gardner Minshew or Andy Dalton or Daniel Jones or some other guy that's just a guy, we know that they're likely going to turn to the draft to kind of help solve their quarterback problem. So there's that. And then there's the option where Geno gets re-signed and we have an opportunity to draft a guy, maybe not in the top 5, maybe it's a little later in the draft, to come in and spend a year below Geno, acclimate in the NFL and be ready to compete in 2024, may not end up having the job, or depending on what the contract looks like with Geno. But nonetheless, I think Seattle would be wise to invest in that opportunity. So let's go through the list, Keith, and just kind of establish what you think of that prospect, where they might fall in the draft if Seattle's interested. And as we move deeper into the list, maybe we can figure out if it's a good fit or not.
Yeah. So I think at the top of the draft, most people would put Alabama's Bryce Young. The guy you watch his tape, and he is what you want out of a quarterback. He gets the ball out super quick. He's smart with the ball. He reads defenses well. He knows what defenses are doing before the ball is snapped. He's got a live arm as far as getting the pass there. He's super accurate. He's kind of everything that you want, except for the fact that he's tiny.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean like short, because I know that was a thing
5'11", 195.
But he's not built out the way Russ was, because Russ was like 220. And Bryce Young is skinny. And
Yes.
as we've seen with players like Tua and some other guys that just aren't that big. The NFL, you take a beating. And even though they protect the quarterbacks now more than they ever have in the past, you still end up taking a beating. And
skinny
so
ankles, skinny knees, skinny shoulder joints, all that comes into play. And it is hard, Keith.
Well, you know what the big knock, do you remember what the big knock on Geno Smith was when he was coming out? No. Skinny knees.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it sounds weird when you say it out loud, but it is true. It's a factor, and it is a factor with Bryce Young. I love everything about his game. You mentioned all the things that are on his positive list: the instincts, the feel, the ability to put a ball into a small window, to be able to lead wide receivers open. Give them yards after catch possibilities and so forth. He's just excellent at all that stuff. Cool under pressure, the kind of quarterback that you want, especially if you're Alabama leading your team. Go ahead.
So years ago, evaluating quarterbacks, there was a guy who I watched his tape and I'm like, this guy is absolutely a first round pick, maybe the first overall pick in the draft, if he wasn't so damn short. But he was. Okay, the Seahawks drafted him. His name is Russell Wilson. But I was very much against the idea of drafting Wilson because I'm like, there is a minimum as far as the height. And Wilson, of course, made me look stupid, and I'm happy to admit that. CJ Stroud looks like Russell Wilson did at Wisconsin. He really is everything you want. I said CJ Stroud. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes while I'm talking. Bryce Young is really that. What we saw in Wilson in his Wisconsin tape. Small guy, but has everything you could possibly want. But again, small guy.
Yeah, that's really the only knock is his size.
Yep.
And in 2021, he had an even better output than he did in 2022. Ended up winning the Heisman with 4,800 yards and 47 touchdowns. I mean, kid was just a crazy, amazing, productive player. Smart. He's going to do well. He's going to interview well. Teams are going to fall in love with this player. I just don't know at the top, at the draft, when it comes right down to it and you got to turn in the card, if that size is going to affect his draft stock or not. At this point, I'm going to say no.
I'm going to say no.
But that could definitely change depending on the team, depending on the fit, the scheme, the coaching, this and so forth. So
yeah, there might be
very interesting.
There might be a coaching staff or a GM that just says no because of his size, and they're going to look stupid. I don't see Bryce Young getting out of the top 10, but he is a top 10 talent. Seattle could be in play for that. He's not going to get out of the top 5.
Would you, if you're Seattle, is he on your big board?
He is.
And why would John Schneider and Pete Carroll like Bryce Young?
See, now you did it too, right? Say the wrong player name.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go down the list.
But we're both ready for our notes for the next one. No, because he's everything that you want, and you have already shown with Wilson that size.
Yeah, but there's a difference between size and body type.
I think that you've seen that you can make it work, and you've also changed philosophies a little bit with Wilson. You knew he could take a hit. You knew you could deal with that. They went cheap on the offensive line and let Wilson make up for it. Now they started investing in the offensive line. And I think if you are drafting Bryce Young, you're going to continue that trend. You're going to continue to invest in the offensive line. And Young's going to end up with a significantly better line in front of him than Wilson ever had. And with that, you're going to say that he's going to take a lot fewer hits, and therefore his durability is going to last.
It'll be very interesting for Bryce Young. Of course, if Seattle doesn't take him, it's going to be interesting for me to see where he lands and how he does, because he's not going to end up
at 9.
Likely ending up on a better roster.
Yeah,
I think,
Atlanta,
his best case scenario is actually probably Seattle.
Well, for any of these quarterbacks, their best case scenario is going to be Seattle because
in the top 10. Yeah.
Because in the top 10, you don't have good teams.
Right.
You've got bad teams like Indy and the Texans, and those are the teams that need quarterbacks, and they're not good franchises. Their rosters are bad. Seattle's a playoff team.
Yeah.
And if you can get onto a Seattle team that runs the ball well, that next year hopefully is going to play better defense and that kind of stuff, and you're on a playoff caliber roster with all the talent around them, like that's a great situation. And so, yeah, it's going to be like, find me a better spot for any of these guys to land in the top 10.
All right. I'm going to give you permission now to talk about CJ Stroud.
All right. CJ Stroud is kind of my number one. And the reason why he's my number one is because he doesn't have the problem that Bryce Young has. And that's very small. CJ Stroud is huge. He's big. He's strong. He's fast. He's an athlete. He's also accurate. He completes deep balls as well as anybody in this draft.
Mm-hmm.
There literally is not a big weakness in his game. I don't think he's as accurate as Bryce Young, but I also don't think any quarterback that's come out of the draft in the last 3 or 4 years
pretty darn
is accurate.
He's pretty darn accurate. I mean, in 2021, he had 4,400 yards, 44 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, completing close to 72% of his passes. This year, he was 66%, 3,600 yards, 41 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. That's pretty accurate and accurate enough. And you mentioned everything else. He's got all the intangibles. He's the most well-rounded, complete quarterback in this draft, I believe. When you take a look, when you add the size factor in, 6'3", 215, more of a prototypical guy. He's a guy that looks to pass first, not a traditionally active guy running the ball. He can run the ball. He's athletic enough. He's projected to run a 4.65 40 fast enough in the NFL. That was about where Russell Wilson was, just to give you an idea.
Yeah, Stroud can run, but he's not a running quarterback.
Correct.
Right? And this honestly, that's a great description of Geno Smith. He can run, but he's not a running quarterback. He has that athleticism, but his instincts aren't to pull the ball down and run at every opportunity.
Yeah. A great point.
And here's the rub on Stroud. And it was the same exact rub I had with Fields a few years ago, also Ohio State. His receivers are better than any cornerbacks they played against. His offensive line is better than any of the defensive lines they faced, except for in the college football playoff. And
he's throwing to a lot of wide receivers is what
he's throwing to a lot of wide open guys. And even when he does throw a contested ball, he's throwing it to someone who's significantly more talented than the person they're up against in that jump ball situation. It makes it hard to evaluate a quarterback when the talent around them is so much better than the talent on the other team.
And you've got to look at also what the scheme and what the coaching staff is asking for from that player in this particular situation. They run a lot of quick looks, single look reads, not asked to do a lot at the line of scrimmage as far as diagnosing. A lot of that is done on the sideline for him, as opposed to a couple of other players I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So that's a factor. So there's a trend. That's why these quarterbacks have a difficult time in the NFL initially, is there's a transition period where most NFL offenses are going to ask quite a bit more from their quarterbacks initially, right out of the gate, on changing plays at the line of scrimmage, reading defenses to know if you're in the right sets or not. Of course, you're getting communication in the helmet during the first 15 seconds of every play, but after the clock reaches 15 on that countdown, that thing goes off, and you've got to be able to think on your feet and act quick.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you've got to do. You can't look at the sidelines and get the answers for you.
Exactly.
And this is why we've seen a lot of players not transition to the NFL instantly, because that's the kind of stuff they have to learn. Yes. I think Bryce Young is ready to play on week 1. I think CJ Stroud athletically can get it done in week 1.
Yeah. And
He
I
can
think
make all the throws and
he's
whatever.
he's smart enough. He's an intelligent player. I think
Yeah.
he's shown enough to where that learning curve will be there. But I think that he's a quarterback that you could look at on this list. And I'm not saying you can rule out that he's going to be a bust. I'm just saying that he's got the tools in the toolbox. He just needs to be able to go in and work hard and get it done.
For him, and there's zero reason to think that he doesn't have the work ethic, but for him, it's a matter of he's got to put in the work in the film room and on the practice field and learn. He's just got to, what he was expected to do in college and what he's going to expected to do in the NFL are different things. There's a whole nother level for him. I don't have any doubts. I really don't. If I was the Seahawks, I would draft CJ Stroud. I would draft him over Bryce Young because I worry that Bryce Young's career is going to be short because of injuries, that you're going to end up in a situation like Chad Pennington, where he played great for like 3 years and then he got a shoulder injury and then he was okay for a couple of years and then he got another injury and then he was kind of done. And whereas with Stroud's a guy that I think is going to have a long career. I would draft Stroud first, but I also know Young's a more ready player. He just is. So
I agree. All right, let's talk about Will Levis, the third quarterback on most big boards. I've got mine flip-flopped a little bit from that, and I can talk about that. But let's talk about Will Levis out of Kentucky. 6'3", 232 pounds, runs a 4.7 240-ish. There's not a consensus on this player, at least not in the established media. I'm not exactly sure where clubs view him. I've heard some things about that are not in such a positive light as far as his playing style and his turnover ratio and all that kind of stuff. There are others in other camps that are saying he's the most pro-ready quarterback in this draft, runs a scheme in college that was somewhat equal to Seattle and San Francisco and the Rams as far as the play calling, the terminology, the looks at the line of scrimmage and so forth. Transition for Will Levis into the NFL might not be as steep as some. And he's got all of the athletic profile that you look for in a quarterback. He's got the strong arm. He's got the ability to move in the pocket, diagnose plays, and fit the ball into almost any spot on the field.
Yeah. So with Will Levis, what you're going to look at and what's really going to give people pause, and I think this is what's going to give you pause, is his completion percentage, which is like a 56%.
And it's over 2 years too.
Yeah. And people are going to look at that and be like, "Ooh, that's a red flag," right? And it kind of is. He also played for Kentucky, and Kentucky is typically the worst team in their conference. Not the last couple of years because they've had Will Levis, but you're talking about in past years being Oregon State in the Pac-12, or last year being Colorado in the Pac-12. And you have a talent. Everything that I said about Stroud having superior talent at every position than your opponent, Will Levis had a talent deficiency at every position around him compared to the opponent. And that is going to cause problems. He was under pressure a lot. They didn't have much of a running game. They couldn't protect him very well. He didn't have receivers that could get open and create separation. He willed that team into being good. Something that came out. So, okay, I'm aging myself here a little bit. When Matt Ryan came out, there was a lot of questions about him. His arm strength was a little weak and whatever. And I looked at him and I said, how many quarterbacks from top schools make it in the NFL? Most of the NFL starting quarterbacks at that time were coming out of schools who had to deal with adversity around them constantly. Matt Ryan came out of Boston College, not exactly a powerhouse. Okay, not exactly a mid-tier team. They're generally pretty bad, but it gave him, he never had a clean pocket. He knew how to throw off platform. He didn't have right? He didn't have guys that were beating everyone through throwing to open guys. I get that same feeling from Levis, where it looks like he could be a better pro stat wise than he was a college player because he's already playing without a clean pocket on every play, right? Bryce Young and CJ Stroud don't have that. They have to learn how to play without a clean pocket.
So one of the things that you mentioned about CJ Stroud was that it's hard to evaluate a quarterback with such great talent around him. Well, I would argue that it's really hard to evaluate a quarterback that doesn't have any talent around him either.
There's no talent around him. Yeah, I can hear that.
So I'm going to give you a little hope here. And Levis completed 65% of his passes, not 56% of his passes in 2022. 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. That's the part that worries me a little bit. In 2021, same sort of thing. In his debut,
it was lower as far as his pass.
I'll have to double check. My numbers I've got right now in front of me say 65%, but I'll double check that.
If it's that high, draft the kid. Holy cow!
In 2021, his debut season with Kentucky, he completed 66% of his passes, 2,800 yards, 24 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. That's the part that I'm having a hard time with a little bit. The interceptions, it's the holding the ball too long, throwing in tight windows, throwing turnover-worthy throws, taking bad sacks, and some pressure situation things that kind of give me a little pause. I will say that the athletic upside, the arm, the stature, the command, not flinching in the pocket and so forth, those are all great attributes for him. You're right with the talent around him. That's what makes it harder to evaluate some of those things that I just mentioned as far as holding the ball, taking bad sacks, forcing throws and so forth. You're going to do that when you start to press, when you're trying to get your team over the hump, when you're not having any help, when your offensive line is a sieve and you're having to deal with that as well as try to make plays down the field. It's just really hard. So all that said, I'm just not quite comfortable as a quarterback talent evaluator to draft Will Levis. I need a little bit of help with regards to that to get me over the hump, feeling good. If Seattle were to pull the trigger at 5, and Will Levis was the kid, I would say, okay, I'm in, because Seattle's done their due diligence. John Schneider has shown, even if he hasn't drafted quarterbacks, he's shown interest in quarterbacks to a level where I know he's on the right track with being able to evaluate talent. And if he's their guy, I'm in.
If there's a quarterback that he's in on in the draft, they tend to be tremendous professionals. The two most notable quarterbacks, the two quarterbacks that we know for certain that he was 100% in on have been Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes.
And he drafted Russell Wilson.
And he was ready to trade Russell Wilson for Josh Allen, according to at least one report. So
yeah,
he clearly is a guy that can evaluate quarterbacks. If he turns around and drafts any of these guys, including the guy that we're going to talk about next, that I am not sold on in any way. I'm going to have to go, okay, what am I missing? What am I not seeing? Because if he thinks that, like I said, the guy that we're going to talk about in a minute is the guy, he knows more about this than I do. And I'm going to have to go, okay, I must have missed something.
Well, also we can start to talk about draft position as well now. Seattle has pick number 5 overall in the draft. We also have pick 20. We also have a pick 37, I believe. So we have some flexibility there to move around. So we've got some draft capital. We can move back from 5. Maybe we feel more comfortable drafting a certain quarterback at 10 as opposed to 5, or maybe it's the 20th pick. We can move up or back from there and so forth and so on. So the guy that Keith's alluding to is Anthony Richardson, the kid out of Florida, 6'4", 236 pounds, projected to run high 4.8, 4.9 range speed-wise. He has elite arm strength.
Oh, he's going to run faster than that.
Big physical frame, incredibly
he's going to run faster
raw.
than that.
Well, he's projected at 4.5. I'm saying there's talk of him being in the 4.4, 5 range.
You said 4.849.
Oh, not 4.8. I'm sorry. 4.48.
I'm like, there's no way he's that slow.
4.48. 4.48.
There you go.
But in summary, I mean, Richardson needs polish, but his upside exceeds everyone in this draft class. But he's a low floor, high ceiling prospect. And you can look that up in Webster's dictionary because that's exactly what he is. He's low floor, highest ceiling possible. And you just don't know yet because he just doesn't have enough experience. And what he did show was raw. And
he's got
he's
one
the guy
year
with the low.
where he was a 1 year as a full-time starter, in which he completed under 54% of his passes, a yards per completion or yards per attempt of 7.8 per yards, which is terrible for a college quarterback.
Do you see any of his wide receivers and running backs getting drafted in the NFL along with him this year?
I don't know. Not many. I will say that the
talent around him.
The talent around Anthony Richardson is better than the talent around Will Levis. Is it substantially better? No, but it is better. There are guys in Miami, in Florida that will be drafted. I don't know if there's anyone on offense in Kentucky other than Will Levis that will get drafted. Like not even just this year, but next year or the year after.
Well, Chris Rodriguez, the running back, is going to get drafted for sure. And their Ricky Stromberg, their center, is probably going to get drafted.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, he only threw 17 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Right? Yeah. There's a lot to look at this and be.
He also ran for 629 yards and 9 touchdowns as well.
True. And the reason why he was a starting quarterback was because of his ability to run.
Yeah. He was a dynamic guy for sure.
Yep. Absolutely. It wasn't for his ability to throw the ball. He had great
games, though. I mean, he threw for 453 yards against Tennessee, had a great win against them, beat LSU, Keith.
Wins aren't a quarterback stat.
Yeah. I know.
So I don't.
But he had great games in those games.
Yep. Tennessee didn't have a great defense, but he did. LSU did. LSU had a pretty good defense, and he put up some numbers there, in a game in which the guys around him were less talented than the guys in the that they're playing against. And so he's got. If you watch highlights and not watch game film, Anthony Richardson looks like the best quarterback prospect since, I don't know, Elway.
And even disregarding every mistake that he ever made, just that upside stuff is enough for teams to be salivating over him and possibly not letting him leave the first round just because of the ceiling stuff. It's not. And that's where I think you and I disagree slightly. It's not the prospect stuff and the mistakes and all that stuff. I see that as well. I'm just saying the upside is so high that I don't believe that he's going to get past Seattle's pick at 20 because
agreed.
Somebody's going to give him a job in the NFL and let him figure it out. And he needs a year. He does. He's highly inaccurate, but beyond that, he's got so many tools.
If he's sitting there at 20 and Seattle didn't draft a quarterback at 5, they went into another position. I agree with you. I think Seattle will take him. And if John Snyder is willing to say, yep, this is a guy, I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't see it, but I'm going to trust it because I trust Snyder's ability to do quarterbacks. And I don't see him getting past somewhere, 20.
In that range. Yeah, I agree. I agree in that range. So let's talk about one more guy that I think kind of fits in the same sort of conversation, but for a completely different reason. And that I think Seattle also takes a look at Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee.
As they absolutely should.
And the reason, and Hendon Hooker is the opposite of Anthony Richardson as far as accuracy and taking care of the ball and all that kind of stuff. He's a much more polished prospect, but he hurt his ACL in the second to last game of the season, probably out. in 2024 for any NFL team, realistically. But here's a guy that, if he hadn't been hurt, possibly would have won the Heisman and would have been a first round talent and gone above Anthony Richardson. And I think a guy like Hendon Hooker's in play for Seattle because Seattle doesn't have to use a first round pick, maybe not even a second round pick. And if it is a second round pick, it's probably their fourth pick overall at 58, where they would consider a guy like Hendon Hooker if he's there. And if Seattle were to take him, I'm with you on the John Schneider comment earlier on Anthony Richardson. I would be like, hey, we're drafting this kid. We don't need him to play right away. We've got Geno Smith under contract. We're looking ahead into 2024. We're going to let him learn the system, heal his ACL, and compete next year. I would be all over that because that would be a perfect scenario, I think, for Seattle.
Agreed. I mean, this is a guy who's 6'4", 218, completed 69.6% of his passes in 2022 before his injury, 27 touchdowns to 2 interceptions.
Let me say this. Hold on. 2-year combo over the last 2 years, 6,080 yards, 70% completion, 58 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 58 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. This is at Tennessee. 1,050 yards rushing, 10 touchdowns, wins against Florida, LSU, and Alabama in 2022 before tearing his ACL.
Yeah.
That's the quarterback. That's the kind of thing where you get the value. You kind of pounce on that if you're a Seahawk general manager, because you're filling out your first 3 picks with really filling your roster, which we need to do. And then you go get a guy that you can kind of have the luxury pick. We've got 5 in the top 100. You take one of those luxury picks in the 4th pick overall that you've got, and you spend it on a guy that you can marinate a little bit. And I think it could end up being the best situation for Seattle.
Okay. Here's the rub on Hooker. And the reason why I am not sold. He is 25.
Yeah, he's 25. Yeah, I turned 25 last month.
And so, and as down as I am on Anthony Richardson, he's 21.
Right.
He is 4 years younger. He will be at the end of his rookie contract with 4 years in the NFL of learning pro football before he is the same age as Hendon Hooker.
Hendon Hooker will be 30 years old in his second contract. Yeah, that's a big issue. It's a big issue.
It's a huge issue. And if you look at guys that, that are drafted,
that's why he's going to go in the between, say, pick 50 and 80. Hendon Hooker.
I don't know if he goes that early. Combination of he won't play his rookie year because he's injured and he's old. So the first time you're going to get where he's going to enter the year as your starting quarterback, the first time you're going to be able to count on him, it's not until he's 26 years old.
Yeah, everything you're saying is completely true. I will say this. Jim Nagy came out and said that he absolutely completely nailed his interview process at the Senior Bowl, and teams love him.
And if you look at it, watch him play, Tennessee they beat Alabama. They were a national powerhouse. They were the team that if anyone's going to compete with Georgia, it was going to be Tennessee. And the moment he got hurt, that team looked terrible. He made Tennessee look fantastic, and they didn't have the talent. This is a phenomenal player. I will say that guys getting drafted at 25, the success rate of those players is significantly lower than the rest of the NFL guys.
Yeah.
There is no track record whatsoever of guys his age having NFL success.
So let's keep the conversation going. So I think that's in play for Seattle for the reasons that we stated. Obviously, the downside is the age thing. We're not going to get around that. That's why I think 58 would be the earliest I would consider him. If he's sitting there at 86, where we have our 4th or our 5th overall pick in the draft, I'd feel much better.
86 is where he belongs. Honestly, if he's there at 86, you go ahead. That's a third round pick. You take him. You let him sit for a year and get healthy, or at least part of a year and get healthy before you bring him in. I actually think that he is a great fit for a team like Houston. But they'll draft draft Bryce Young in the first round, and they'll skip him. But a smart team would be like the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Early in the third round, or late in the second, where they've got guys they know they can win with, even if they suck. And you give Hooker a year to develop and heal, and then you run out your franchise quarterback and look great doing it.
And I'm not so concerned about the age. I am, obviously, but if you can get 2 contracts out of a quarterback like this, I'd feel pretty good about the draft pick, especially if you're getting him in the third round, or later. Because you're still going to get 8 years of production out of a player, and that's all you can really hope for in the NFL. It's just that early development time, for a quarterback. It's a big thing. All right, so Tanner McKee is my next quarterback on the list, 6 overall. Stanford, 6'6", 230. He's got zero mobility. He has issues with accuracy, and he's not going to run at all. He's going to sit in the pocket. He's a more traditional pocket quarterback. If your team's looking for that, great. He might be your guy. I don't want him in Seattle, but
if you're looking for a guy who has the mobility of Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, he's your guy. And that's not a compliment.
Yeah, and it works for some teams. It does, but yep. I see him as more of a backup guy.
He's not a guy that he doesn't fit Seattle's system. What they've done, bringing in Waldron and establishing this offense, they need a guy that can roll out, throw on the run, those kind of things. That's who they want, and he's not it. He's just not it.
He's like Mike Glennon.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a few other guys. We're getting deeper now into the 4th, 5th, 6th undrafted range. Jaron Hall, the BYU quarterback. He's also an older prospect, 6'1", 205.
Understand that year younger than Hooker.
Understand that he had an opportunity to go into the Senior Bowl and impress, and he did not.
True.
And then Jake Haener, Fresno State, 6'1", 200 pounds, had an opportunity to go into the Senior Bowl and impress, and he did.
He's a guy I am really high on Jake Haener compared to other guys, and I get that that's not a popular take. Most people are like, "Nah, don't worry about it." Like he's an undrafted guy. I don't think that's true. I'm higher on Jake Haener than a lot of people are. I think he has starting caliber ceiling.
Yeah, he's kind of like a Gardner Minshew,
Yeah.
He played at Washington State, but a smaller college guy, Fresno State, not a lot of weapons around, good strong arm, gritty, nice touch, doesn't have the huge long ball arm talent, but he can get the job done. And
but he's smart.
I see him more as a backup guy in the NFL.
He's smart. He spreads the ball around. He's accurate. He gets the ball out quickly when he needs to. He sounds a lot like a guy named Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the biggest arm.
Right.
But it didn't seem to matter in San Francisco.
If you can make Jake Haener a system quarterback, a point guard, that's great. He's not going to give you a lot of mobility. I mean, he's got 4.8 speed or whatever, but.
Yeah, he's not going to be a running court. This isn't a read option guy. But he can roll out. He can throw on the run.
Yeah. That's my list, really. I mean, the kid from Purdue's on here. The kid from Shepherd that nobody's heard about, that played in the Senior Bowl is on the list. But
you're wasting your time there. I mean, he's a guy that.
Guys.
Yeah, there is an undrafted guy. People will talk. Stetson Bennett's name will come up because he played for Georgia, but he also played for Georgia. We know who he is. Right, everybody's seen him play. He's not a great NFL prospect.
No.
Right. So
that's it.
And then,
I mean, really,
The one guy that I think will draw some attention, and rightfully so, as a drafted player would be Max Dugan,
Yeah.
the quarterback out of TCU, because TCU's offense
Yeah.
was legit. And that's not a super talented team. They made it to the national title game in large part because of
He was a gritty player.
Dugan's ability to run that offense and be really smart with the football over and over and over again. He won't get drafted high. I mean, we're talking like a 6th round pick, but someone is going to draft him. And I think someone's going to draft him and then be happy that they did, because I see him more as a backup who might come in and surprise you if he gets a chance to play. But there's some talent there. There is.
So back to the top. So we had Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Hendon Hooker. That's our top 5, likely the top 5 and as far as the picks go, as they come off the board. What are your feelings on where Seattle's at? I mean, obviously they've got to make a decision on Geno from all sides, including Geno's statements around the Pro Bowl that happened this weekend. Sounds like they're making progress. Things are probably going to happen.
They're going to get Geno signed. I'm expecting them to get Geno signed soon. And the reason why I say that, I was thinking about this because I know you and I were talking about, maybe they'll slow play it and let him go test the market and whatever. They don't want Joe Burrow and some of the other like guys that are hitting their second contract to go out and set a market that's $60 million and then think, oh, well, if there were 60, Geno's worth at least 30. Right. And then have that be what screws up the negotiation. I think they want his deal done before those things happen.
Interesting. All right. So say they sign Geno. It's a 3-year deal. The first 2 years look like they're pretty much guaranteed. So what do they do in the draft as far as a quarterback? Do they skip the position altogether and ride one or two more seasons with what they've got with Geno, Drew Lock, and maybe reevaluate in the 2024-2025 draft where they wouldn't have necessarily the draft capital up at the top of the draft? Or do they take advantage of their position currently and this class and a couple of players that they might find attractive?
It'll come down to Pete Carroll. If Pete Carroll says, I want to win right now because I'm done in 2 years, they'll wait and they'll draft a guy like Jake Haener or Max Dugan late in the draft and run with Geno and hope that they can develop a guy. If Pete Carroll is still saying, nah, I'm not close, then I think even if they sign Geno, I think they invest a pick on a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson.
Wow.
Because it's one of those investments. You've got Geno for 2 years. You can let Anthony Richardson develop for a couple of years,
especially if he's a first round pick.
He'll still only be 23
and on a 5-year deal.
Yeah. So he'll still only be 23. As much as like I have been so negative on Richardson. If John Snyder's negative on Richardson, then don't draft him. Like, take him off your board.
Yeah.
If John Snyder likes Anthony Richardson, I am going to just say there's something about him I didn't see, and I'm going to wait it out because I think
the part that you didn't see is probably going to be in the interview process.
Exactly.
Because he's going to kill it on the field. He's going to kill it in the combine.
The combine is going to be like, he's going to stand out. He's just going to be one of those guys, and everyone's going to be like, whoa, okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But if he's killing it in the classroom, that's the big.
If he's in there impressing NFL scouts with and GMs with his ability to diagnose stuff on the board and draw out plays and be like, hey, well, if I see this, I'm going here and here's why, and all of those kind of things, he's getting drafted. He won't get out of the top 10. If he goes in there and looks like an idiot, he won't be drafted in the second round.
Yeah, right. Or he'll fall. He'll fall.
Or
And
he'll
everybody go,
fall.
I don't understand why he's fallen. And he's picked 40 overall. Well,
Yep.
that was probably it.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I saw a really bad NFL comp for him that made me cringe, and it was Christian Hackenberg. And if you don't know who that is, go look him up.
Yeah, I recognize the name, but I can't place it.
Hack is a guy that was a second round pick and was inaccurate as inaccurate could be, but super athletic and never developed into anything.
I look at him more like a more recent guy as Cam Newton. I mean, he's got the physical attributes.
Cam Newton's not a bad comp. Now, Cam Newton went 1 overall because he played for a winning team and he showed significantly better accuracy than Richardson has. But his size, his ability to run power football as a runner,
yes,
and the arm, his ability to complete the deep pass, he's a true dual threat. Like, Cam Newton is not a bad comp at all.
I just know that as I go deeper into this process and we get to the combine stuff, I'm going to be drooling over this player and I'm not going to be able to help myself. I'm going to have to wear a bib on the show because it's just going to be, it's going to be stupid. I mean, because I can see a guy like that in Seattle's system. It just helps everything flow if your accuracy is there, if you're not turning the ball over and you can run the ball like that. Oh my goodness.
There's the question. If the accuracy is there and you don't turn the ball over, and he hasn't shown that those are true.
True.
Whereas Hendon Hooker, if he wasn't 4 years older, his accuracy is there and he doesn't turn the ball over.
I just don't know what I'm looking at as far as the coaching staff at Florida and where he's come from, all that stuff. I mean, it's just, you got to dig a little deeper to get there.
It's hard. It's hard with the Florida schools right now, just all of them. Because the coaching staffs at Florida, Florida State, and Miami have all been in flux. And it's hard. Yep.
So this is the first of many series with regards to prospects in the NFL draft. I'm sure we'll dial these up at least one a week until we get to April, which is really not that far away, a couple months, and then we'll be there.
Yeah, we may take a break a little bit when free agency begins, just to cover all the news and possible signings and that kind of stuff. But if we do a position group per show on this, we can't take too many breaks, or we won't be done by
that's true.
by April.
Yeah, and we will take a little bit of a break. We'll probably get done with the offensive side of the ball before free agency. We'll take the break, and then we'll come back and we'll do defense. Yeah, fun stuff. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. You know where the show's at. And when you find it at Seahawks Playbook Podcast, you can hit the subscribe button. That would be very helpful. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWC Hawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.